Hey guys, welcome back to another video. Today we're talking about this camera, the 6K Pro. And I've been using this camera for almost 3 months now, and I'm gonna share with you my experience using it, the good, the bad, and what I think about it using it for 3 months. Let's jump into it. As I said, I've been using this camera for 3 months now, and I actually shot quite a lot on it, indoors and outdoors, like in a studio environment, and also outdoors, kind of a more run and gun style. And I want to start with the pros that I like on this camera, and the big pro is image quality. The image quality is just so much better than the camera that I was previously using, the Sony a7 III. It just has that cinematic look to it, and I'm just really happy about how it looks. Even though it's a Super 35 sensor, it has that cinematic look to it. I'm really liking the image quality, and it also is really easy to handle on my computer. The codec is really good, so I had no problems editing it on my 16-inch MacBook Pro. And I actually had this video where I stacked quite a few layers on top of each other, and that was in a 6K RAW format. And you know, when you stack a lot of layers on top of each other, the computer tends to like freak out, but it handled it no problem. There's like maybe 15 layers on top of each other, 6K RAW video, and it was pretty smooth. And I'm really happy how the codec performs in terms of editing and smoothness on my computer. I mean, with the 12K RAW, you have just so much more flexibility than with the Sony a7 III. You can change the ISO in post, or you can just like change the white balance. It's not dialed in when you shoot in RAW. Also, the dynamic range, I would say, is pretty good. It's not the best, but it's pretty good, and I really like how the image looks on this camera. Just like, I'm loving it. I also made some LUTs for the camera or any other log footage that I'm using on my projects. Especially for the product videos, there's an elegance LUT which I use on my product videos where I can really get that dark look. I would really appreciate it if you check it out and you're supporting the channel with that. Since I got the camera, there's also been a firmware update that solved some of the issues with the camera that people were complaining about. For example, the blue tint on the back screen. You can now calibrate the screen to whatever color balance you want, which is nice. And you also get an RGB histogram that you can see like what colors are peaking. And I also struggled to get my LUTs on there. It didn't work before the update, and after that it worked just perfectly fine. I installed the firmware update, and now my LUTs are working. I also really like that flip out screen. I shot some low angle shots when I'm shooting a car commercial, and without having that, you can't really see what you're shooting. So I really like that flip out screen, even though it doesn't like flip over, but you just can tilt it. And it's really helpful when you're shooting low angle stuff or high angle stuff. I'm really happy that Blackmagic did that, and it helps you out a lot when you shoot run and gun stuff. I'm also pretty impressed, even though it doesn't have image stabilization, how still you can hold the camera, even though I don't have a stabilized lens, and it doesn't have image stabilization. I shot out of a driving car, and because it's pretty bulky and you can just get a good grip on it, it doesn't shake a lot, which I really like. And I like that it's a little bit heavier, that you get that cinematic shake a little bit. So even though it doesn't have image stabilization, you can get really cinematic shots with it. That brings me to like a not so good point, that it's so bulky. I tried to put it on my Ronin S, and at first I thought I never get it on there because this is not possible. And then it's just until the last inch I could just barely fit it on. So you actually have to slide on the plate first and then screw it on. It's a little bit tricky. I think you can like offset it a little bit to the left, which makes it easier, but it didn't have that tool. So the Ronin S can handle the weight, but there's for sure easier cameras, like the Sony cameras. They're way lighter, which will be easier to use on a gimbal. You can use it on the gimbal, but bear in mind that it's a little bit tricky to get on there. What I also really like is the user friendliness of the menu. Sometimes you want to change something quickly, and it's just so easy to find the setting you want and just tap the screen. This is a really cool set if you press for time, and especially when I shoot at sunset, I have to change something, and it's just really easy to change it because I don't have a lot of time because the sun will go down. It's a really cool thing to be able to change the settings quickly, and the Blackmagic does that, I think, better than any other camera. So with the ND filters, I'm still loving them, but I have a few issues with the hard stops. Like there's 2 stop increments, and sometimes I wish I could dial it in more precise, and the point of the ND is to keep the aperture wide open. And sometimes you find yourself in situations where a 2 stop ND is too less and a 4 stop is too much, so you have to crank up the ISO a little bit so you get more noise into the image. So I really love the internal NDs, but sometimes I wish they're more precise, but who am I to complain at that price? And I could just slap an invariable ND in front of the lens and that would solve the problem. But yeah, I just want to let you know about the issue with the hard stops of the ND filters. And this leads me to the bad things that I don't really like about this camera, and most of them I knew beforehand, but once you have it and you don't have the features that you're used to in your old camera, you're really like a little bit disappointed and just really miss your old camera. And the first thing is autofocus. I knew that this camera doesn't have autofocus, but sometimes I wish I had autofocus, especially on a gimbal. You just have to look that you have all the time the right distance, and sometimes that's not too easy. Sometimes I wish I had face tracking of other cameras, like the Sony cameras. They do it amazing. But as I said, I knew this before I got this camera, and I'm fine with pulling the focus myself. But sometimes I just miss the feature, and I didn't buy this camera to shoot a lot of run and gun, like documentary work. I wouldn't use it that much. I just bought this camera to get a nice cinematic image for like music videos or a short film, and not so much for like run and gun documentary stuff. I think this camera serves a different purpose for a good image quality and for a controlled environment where you don't have to go crazy on the focusing. Another thing that I absolutely don't like about this camera is the crop in high frame rates. In 120 frames per second, it crops in so much. I don't really like that. It just uses, I think, a bit of the sensor, and it's just too much of a crop for me. It's fine for 60 frames per second because you can shoot that in 6K, but sometimes you just need that super slow motion, the 120 frames per second, and it's already a Super 35 sensor, and when you crop in even more, it's just, I don't think it's usable for me. I try to avoid shooting 120 frames per second when it comes to this camera, but I just wanted to let you know that there's a serious crop on it. Another thing that I like is the possibility to record to external media, to external SSD drives. And while you can get a lot of storage for relatively cheap money, I had the experience that the cable came loose when I was shooting outside of a car, and I didn't really pay attention to it. I think that the cable came loose at some point and it just stopped recording, and I just didn't pay attention. So this was my fault because I could have paid attention to it more or used an internal recording media. Just being cheap here. I just wanted to let you know that once the cable comes loose, it stops recording, and you might not even pay attention to it when you're shooting in like an action environment. If you have in a control environment where you always can look at the screen, I think you will notice it easier. But I just wanted to let you know that when you shoot like action stuff, the cable can come loose easily and it stops recording there. So just want to make sure you use internal media when you record action scenes like that. And I know there's some accessories that fix the cable of the SSD drive, and I actually got one now. But I just wanted to let you know that those things are also not 100%. And if you really want to make sure, you want to use internal media. And this brings me to another question. Do you need a cage for the 6K Pro to rig it out, or is it better for run and gun? The company Needs It was kind enough to send me their brand new cage for the 6K Pro, and I'm gonna slap it on there and see how it performs and see if it's useful. So here's the camera, and I wish there's a fast way to get a cage on there. Let's see. I like how this looks actually, and with the top handle it's way easier to get shots like this, like from the bottom. And I also got this cable holder, so the cable shouldn't come out as easy. And yeah, it just adds a little weight to it. Let's see how it works. The only thing I don't like is that on the bottom I can't use the battery grip anymore, because the battery life is not great. It's just only an hour, but with the battery grip it gives you up to 3 hours. So you can't use that with that grip, so there's a disadvantage. But it's really robust and fits the camera perfectly, and like the top handle, as I said, to get these low angle shots, and you also have a better grip than just holding it on the side grip of the camera. So I really like how the top grip works. It for sure adds a little weight to it, so even if I just hold it up like this for longer, it's just pretty heavy already, because the camera itself is already heavy. and with the cage it adds another weight, but there's a lot of mounting options here and you can access everything pretty good. As I said, the only downside is that I can't use the battery grip. But yeah, this is a solid cage. I think I will keep this on here just to have a better grip on it and to have a little bit more mounting options when it comes to, there's like 1, 2, 3, there's 3 cold shoe adapters here. And there's tons of mounting points so you can mount stuff to there. So if you want to put a microphone on there, I could see why you wouldn't use this cage. It's pretty good. And the top handle has this easy locking mechanism where you can just slide it out and then just remove it. And if you want to check out that cage, I put the link down in the description. I think I will keep mine on the camera, even though it's a little heavier, but I like to have it on the top handle and it also protects the camera. And when I want to mount a microphone to it, it's easy to do so. So even though I thought I didn't need a cage with this camera, now that I have one, I'm really loving it. And another cool thing about that needs a cage is that there's a flat head on the bottom of the cage and it's magnetic, so you can't lose it. And you can just tighten the 1/4" screws on the bottom of the cage. It's a really helpful tool because I don't know how many times I just used a coin or my finger or something like to tighten the screws. And with this cage, you're never gonna need another coin or anything. It just sits on the bottom of the cage. So what do I think about this camera after 3 months of using it? I think it's a great camera. I'm still loving it and I love the image that comes out of it. It has a few limitations, so I won't use it for certain videos. Like if I have to shoot a lot of slow motion, I won't use it. And if I have to rely on autofocus a lot and I put it on a gimbal, this is not the perfect camera. But other than that, in a controlled environment, I want to shoot more short films with it. I want to shoot more music videos with it. I think this is a great camera for people that shoot in a controlled environment, and I really, really recommend it. At least in my opinion, there's no other camera out there, especially for the price, that can shoot such a high quality image like the Blackmagic Pocket 6K Pro. So would I recommend this camera? Yes, absolutely, but depends what you're shooting. If you shoot a lot of travel films, music videos, short films, then you absolutely should get this camera, especially for the price. There's nothing out there. If you shoot a lot of stuff that requires autofocus or gimbals, I think there's better cameras out there. But all in all, the Blackmagic Pocket Pro is a great camera that will stay in my camera bag for a while. That being said, I would never buy a camera that you haven't had in your hand before. It's something else if you switch from one Sony model to another. But if you're switching brands, I would really recommend renting out the camera first and testing it out beforehand until you make the decision to purchase a camera. So that is it. Thanks so much for sticking around until the end of the video. I hope you learned something today. As always, a free and easy way to support the channel is hit that like button. And if you like my content, you might consider subscribing. I'd really appreciate it. If you have any questions, shoot me a message on Instagram at sebpicmedia, and I will see you in the next one.